Hey everyone, meteorologist Ross Whitley here talking about the tropics. Wanted to give you an update because there's been a lot of hype or hoopla, whatever, about things awakening as we head into August. And that, in my opinion, is a because August is typically when we start to see activity pick up. The reasons for that, you usually see Saharan dust drop off. We don't usually see as much of that across the Atlantic. We usually see shear in the Caribbean start to fade as well. And those two things combined, along with the warming waters of the main development region, all allow for tropical activity to perk up. And typically we stop seeing cold fronts working their way across the Atlantic as well. So you start to see a little more unstable conditions, and that instability helps to aid in wave activity. So far, we've got nothing expected over the next 7 days. And why is that? Well, it's because there's still plenty of dust and shear out there. You can see all of this dry air. That is Saharan dust that has come out and filtered across the Caribbean as well as the main development region. That's what this area right here is. That's the main development region. We usually call it the MDR, and that is where we typically watch for these waves to come off of the coast of Africa and then work across. They typically go in one of two directions depending on how they're pulled. Usually work across into the Windward and Leeward Islands, or if they take a really far southern route, they can end up down here as well. But as we get into this time of year, we typically start to see the waves work on that southern route and then start to work off to the north as quickly as they can. All depends on how they develop and how far their towers build, how far out. That all has influence on the eventual steering currents and the eventual locations of where those systems go. So what's going on right now, again, it's all about the dry air that is in place currently, and that is all of that Saharan dust, so all of that orange. We also have quite a bit of divergence still going on. So if we zoom in here, you're going to be able to see a little bit of that. The winds aloft here, more or less coming like that, and then we've got winds here coming like that. So that's a little bit of convergence. That's why you've got this dry air in place. But we also have the winds basically going in that direction and going in that direction. So anything that tries to come in here is getting pulled apart going up that way or being pulled apart going down that way, which is why we haven't seen any of our main development stuff really pan out. That's also why the modeling keeps saying, yeah, we're going to see these waves, and we've got one out there right now. We're going to see these waves battle through all of this dry air, battle all of this shear, end up somewhere up here and develop. Well, so far as we get closer and closer to those solutions becoming reality, they end up looking like this, a dead wave. That was the wave that the models got excited about a week ago. And then you can see the next wave out here. That's what the models are excited about as we go into next week. What's likely the fate with that? Well, you can see a low pressure system working up here close to Spain. You can see the nice cold front associated with that. That's going to help to pull more Saharan dust off along with this wave coming out. So it's going to deal with dust and shear to work along here. It may even look healthy by the time it gets to there, but eventually what we'll see is probably this torn apart. And the models, as we get closer and closer to this wave emerging, are starting to drop interest in it. And that's likely what happens, and usually what happens as we are this early in the season. We see these models get excited about waves once they're over Africa, and then once they come out into the water, give it a couple of days, they start to break apart. They start to feel the impacts of really just hostile conditions out there, and they start to really lose interest in that. And that's exactly what we've got going on as well. We also have this nice tut here that's a tropical upper tropospheric trough and high pressure that's across the Atlantic, helping to guide all of that as well. So what's happening is as this high pressure runs into this tut, it's breaking down. We're getting these little anti-vorticities working across that, and these upper level lows. They take all of these waves and they stretch them vertically, and that's called vertical wind shear, and those really kill a lot of the activity going on out there as well. So that's the reason why the Atlantic is so hostile. Also, the other reason why the Caribbean is so hostile and the Gulf really hasn't been able to produce anything other than the very local stuff where we had Barry really close to the coast there. Unfortunately, that ended up producing all the flooding across Texas. And then we had Andrea that was way out there. That's really about it. And you've had your little coastal local storm here, Chantal. And again, that was a relatively quick mover there. If you blinked, you missed it. Unfortunately, that also caused floodings across the Carolinas, central Carolinas. So even when these systems are really not all that big of a deal, they can still be a big deal. And tropical systems are always a big deal. The other reason why we're not seeing much going on here and we don't have a whole lot of favorability, well, is because the Eastern and Central Pacific has just been one big rager. It's been a party of storms out there. We've got 2 storms ongoing, one that's getting ready to fade. We've got 2 more storms likely to develop. They're probably probably both going to develop around there. And then we've got another storm that'll probably develop down the line. That's going to work something up like that. And what that does when you have all this storm activity is you have outflow. And when you have outflow, that's casting shear across the Caribbean. Once again, it's casting shear across the Gulf. And plus our pattern here with this TUT, we've got our subtropical high in control. What happens, we keep getting these frontal boundaries to come in here. They're running into that high pressure system. You're getting little pieces of energy to break off. They're working back around the high that is across the southeast. And that flow is allowing for, along with this shear, not a whole lot of stuff to go on across the Caribbean or the Gulf. So unfavorable conditions continuing. We should start to see this pattern break down as we get into the middle of the month, but so far the models are just saying that high pressure really gets cranking out here, and what ends up happening is that we just see this extension of the subtropical ridge, and that's really not great news as far as tropical development, and we keep getting these wave breaking activities that happen along that ridge as well. So that keeps dry air around, that keeps high shear around, but it does allow for one thing. It allows for the water temperature to warm, because when you have high pressure in control, you don't have a whole lot of wind. So that warming water may have a consequence down the road, but at least in the short term, that's going to keep things relatively quiet. It's also going to keep the background flow where our waves are coming out super fast. And waves don't want to develop when the motion is super quick either. So that background flow, as well as the shear and all of the activity in the eastern and central Pacific, it's really not allowing for much to go on in the Atlantic. Until we start to break that pattern down, we're probably not going to see much as way as the Atlantic goes either. So going over to what's going on right now, we'll pull that up. We'll get to the Saharan dust in a second. You can look at the eastern Pacific, and like I said, you got two storms out there. Iona looks like it's biting the dust here pretty quickly. It was a major not too long ago, and then you also have Kelly that's also probably going to bite the dust here pretty quickly as it moves into some much colder water across the central Pacific. But we have another area of interest that was a high chance of developing. It looks like the shear from these two storms has kind of helped to keep that at bay, so may not develop, only a moderate chance now. But down the road, you've got two more moderate chances and a high risk of tropical development working into the central Pacific once again. However, we do have at least a couple of pockets of favorability. We'll watch the subtropics. That's this region up here as we get into next week, going into the middle of the month, and that's going to be thanks to these stationary boundaries that get draped really across the northern Gulf as well. And instead of seeing those pieces of energy break down and work across the ridge that's in the southeast, we're going to see these basically just hang out. So with that, we could see something try to develop. The good news is anything that tries to develop here, it's likely going to be a fish mixer, a fish storm. It's going to stay out in the Atlantic, so no real worries to worry about there. No real worries to worry about there, if I said that correctly. And you can see that nice lettering there, nothing expected over the next 7 days. As we get into the middle of August, we're going to start to watch these waves a little more intently. If the shear and dry air start to drop off at all, they may have a better chance of developing. But again, they're going to be battling still unfavorable conditions across the middle of the Atlantic. And as long as we keep getting these wave breaking periods across the central Atlantic and we get a TUT to hang out at all, we're going to continue to see these waves really struggle. And until one gets established and kind of breaks the pattern down and starts to create a better favorable environment, it may take 4, 5, 6, 7 waves to really change the environment out there that are really strong, that look like they're going to develop and then don't develop before we start to see activity really break out. So that's a possibility as we head toward the middle and end of the month. But at the current moment, I'm just not seeing a whole lot. And yeah, the Euro and all of that, people have been cherry picking the AI Euro model. Well, this is the latest Euro, and you can see the wave it was excited about. It's basically killing it now. The next wave it's trying to be excited about, it's really killing that as well. And you can see the wind shear here across the Caribbean, the divergence with the wind working to the south and west there, and then working off to the north and west. That's split flow that really kills these waves altogether. On top of that, we have our big ridge across the Atlantic, and you can see how it combines with the ridge into the Gulf as well. So any flow here or any wave that does try to get established, it's going to try to work towards South Florida, or it's going to be pulled north, which is that vertical wind shear, which is going to really hamper its ability to do anything, or it's going to try to work south and work across the Gulf and then over toward Texas and Louisiana. So if there's any area of favorability out there at all, it's the Bahamas, South Florida, and then back across Texas and Louisiana in that area area. Everything else is pretty much off limits. So waves are going to have to really find their spots here to get going as we go into the middle of the month. And the other issue is, yeah, Saharan dust is just still cranking. You can see the big wave working across the Atlantic, the next big wave getting ready to work across as well. So all of these waves are just having to battle all of this dry air and shear that is still out there. And as long as that's ongoing, you can see even as we get into next Monday, that tut really helping to stretch and pull that dry air vertically and to the north. So that's a good example of exactly what I was just talking about. So all of those things just not helping things move along. So not seeing much in the way of tropical activity in spite of all of those pages out there that are encouraging you that action is going to pick up. It should. We're heading into August. It's typically when we start to see tropical activity pick up. So we'll be keeping an eye on it, but so far so good. And it looks like, as we're looking into at least the foreseeable future, it looks like that so far so good is going to continue. Once that starts to change, we start to see waves get a little more gusto and a little more support as far as the modeling goes beyond, say, a little bit closer to us, say less than 240 hours out, not this 360, 380 hours out before we see anything starting to develop. That's more or less just background noise. That's the model saying it's that time of year. We should see tropical activity starting to develop. However, as we get closer in those time steps, the waves are just not making it because of the hostile conditions out there. So expect to continue to see those pages pumping out things and cherry picking runs and saying, yeah, this is definitely going to happen. But so far, so good. And right now, I'm just not seeing anything that says, yeah, we're going to see a big uptick in activity. There are a couple areas that we're watching, the subtropics, and then toward the middle and end of the month, we'll start to watch the main development region or the deep tropics. But the good news about that, anything that develops out in the deep tropics, that gives you a long time period to watch those waves. It's the stuff that's close to home that frightens you a little bit more because you don't have as much time to watch. When it develops out in the main development region or out in the deep tropics, you get 10, 11, 12 days to watch those systems and really pay attention to what's going on. When they're closer to home, then those are a little more worrisome. And thankfully, we're not talking about anything in the Caribbean. We usually don't until we get toward October, and sometimes in September we can start to see that activity blossom as well, usually in September. September and October is when the Caribbean really comes to life, and that brings the Gulf back into play as well. And the Gulf's always in play, especially if we have frontal boundaries working across the Gulf, which we have as of late, which is what's helped the little, very minimal tropical activity as far as winds go. Obviously, they've been impactful as far as rain go, but minimal activity as far as strength of wind on those systems so far. So hopefully that continues, but if it doesn't and things start to change, of course, we'll notify you. Until then, just keep checking in, keep doing what you usually do, and stay cool because we're still dealing with that heat. Thankfully, we do have a weather pattern on the way.